Today's show is brought to you by CBT Nuggets. You know how much we value ongoing education on the Cloudcast, and CBT Nuggets is exactly what Aaron and I wish we had when we were trying to get our certification early in our careers. CBT Nuggets is all about bringing a personalized touch to learning about cloud computing, virtualization, networking, DevOps, and much, much more. Whether it's their hands-on labs with personalized coaching or the online chat functions that come up with every instructor-led course, CBT Nuggets' team of experts is always there to help you get the most from your training and your path to certification. You can check it all out at cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast and sign up for a free trial. You get access to the full catalog of great training, including virtual labs, quizzes, and other premium features completely free for the first 7 days. That's cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Another Sunday Perspective show. We are finishing up here in September 2021. It's amazing that we are 3/4 of the way through the year. It's starting to be at least in our neck of the woods. I know this southern hemisphere is maybe a little bit different, but it's darker in the morning and it gets darker earlier at night. So this starts to get into the kind of the depressing part of the year. The weather starts to get nice. The leaves change. All that stuff is really wonderful, and you get all the fall things and Halloween and all the fun holidays and stuff. But the whole getting darker thing gets it's kind of a bummer, right? You get to enjoy the sunshine. You wish it wouldn't go away. So for those of you who get hung up on the daylight savings time, this is your time of the year to complain. Hope everybody's doing well. We're going to kind of dive into something that Aaron and I kind of talked about a little bit, maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago on the Everybody's Become the Cloudcast show, but it came up again this week for me in having discussions with some companies. And the question was basically, we were talking about how much to use the cloud and transitioning to the cloud and how they're doing it and all these sort of things. And, won't get into the specifics, but, they asked a really interesting question. They said, hey, over the last 18 months or so, however long people have been in COVID protocol and going through the sort of, new ways that we're doing things, they basically asked, we in our industry have been really busy and have been adopting the cloud more so than we ever had before. And so they asked a couple of questions. The first question was, is this pretty normal? Is everybody kind of experiencing the same thing that we're experiencing? And the second question was, do you expect that, the ways that we've done things over the last 18 months, and this may have just been the last 6 months or whatever it was, but somewhere within that 18 months, do you expect that that's going to remain sort of the model that they have been using? And we got into some details. Or do you think that, if we get back to some sort of, we could keep calling, the new normal, or back to what we kind of the way we experienced things before, do you expect that will happen? And, it was ended up being a really good conversation we had following up. And I thought what I would do this week is kind of dive a little bit into not the specifics of that conversation, but just kind of the way to think about this, or at least my thoughts around it. Because I think there's both some yeses, some nos, some, maybes and ifs and stuff as there are in any good discussion. But I thought I would talk about that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Spot by NetApp. Spot provides a comprehensive suite of CloudOps tools that makes it easier to deliver continuously optimized and reliable infrastructure at the lowest possible cost, all while removing a lot of the manual and time-consuming tasks out of managing cloud infrastructure at scale. Imagine automating your infrastructure to proactively meet the needs of your application. Imagine leveraging the latest in machine learning and automation to scale your infrastructure using the most efficient mix of instances and pricing models. From cost management to infrastructure automation, Spot ensures you maximize your cloud investment. The end result is simply more cloud at less cost. Check them out at spot.io/cloudcast, where you can find more information, request a demo, give it a try by starting a free trial. That's spot.io/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog. With infrastructure monitoring, distributed tracing, and logs, Datadog provides end-to-end visibility into the health and performance of modern applications. Datadog's distributed tracing and APM generates detailed flame graphs for real requests, enabling you to visualize how requests propagate through your distributed infrastructure. See which services or calls are generating errors or contributing to overall latency, and dive deeper into your production code with an always-on code profiler to pinpoint the root cause.
Start monitoring your applications with a free trial, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/APM-cloudcast. That's datadog.com/APM-cloudcast.
And we're back. And, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to dive a little bit into this interesting conversation, that I had a chance to have with a company this week, and kind of follows, like I mentioned, some of the stuff that Aaron and I kind of scratched the surface on maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, maybe a little bit more than that. And it really is, we've sort of adapted to the way the world has evolved, and it kind of looks at a couple of things. One is this idea of, how many hours does it take, or how many repetitions does it take to create a habit? And, if you do things enough times for a long enough period of time, even if it's not necessarily the most optimal way of doing it, does it become a habit? And does it, and once it becomes sort of the new norm, how hard is it to break out of that? Right. So, there's always the thing of, well, if you get into a bad rut, you should get out of that. But, for anybody that works in a larger organization, you understand that sometimes, the new muscle memory just becomes the new way of doing stuff, and you sort of forget why you ever did those things. And I think, so let me hit on a couple of things first and foremost. So the first part of the question that came up was, is this the same thing that's happening in their case, they happen to be working in an industry that, tended to do relatively well as part of the pandemic. And so this was the first part of the question, is like, is every industry going through this? And one of the things I had to kind of highlight was that, not every industry did terribly well during the pandemic, right? So if you were in the airline industry, you were in the hotel industry, you were in, a lot of different industries, you really struggled. If you were in the restaurant industry, I don't mean to laugh or make light of it, but I mean, there were some industries that, because there was literally no human movement, and that impacted, lots of things, sort of secondary and tertiary and so forth. You were literally, probably in a lot of cases very close to going out of business, or potentially going bankrupt, or, having to really rethink how your business ran. Now, other businesses, grew like crazy, right? They were on the other side of it. So, Netflix and gaming and, a lot of more digital industries, things that could cater to people not necessarily moving around, or, could adapt to home delivery, or, if you were in the healthcare industry, or you were in certain things, like things may have been really, really busy for you. Maybe you were trying to, be part of the pharmaceutical industry, and you were trying to find a vaccine, or you were trying to find other things to, help people that were going through the challenges of COVID and so forth. So, I think the first thing is, every industry, and to a certain extent, every company was a little bit different. The second part of it was, they basically said, hey, we have been doing a lot more with the cloud. And a lot of that was because, they just got into a situation that was like, hey, everything going on around us is new, it's unusual, it doesn't fit our normal mode of doing things. The urgency has been ramped way, way up. Everything is, priority one. And so in a lot of cases, they ended up using the public cloud much more than they were. They were much more of a data center centric company. And, they basically were like, we found success, at various levels of success. It wasn't everything perfect the first time, and they still had a learning curve and so forth. But they said, we had, enough success that we look at it as something that, it kind of accelerated their cloud journey, if you will. But they also felt like, it wasn't something that they had, kind of structurally gone into, or organizationally gone into, in a way that they normally would have, to take on big changes in their company. And so it really was an interesting jumping off point for a conversation. And the way that I kind of thought about it, and the way the conversation kind of floated through, it kind of followed this structure. And if you've listened to enough of these Sunday conversations, I tend to sort of make them lists, because, I'm kind of trying to mentally work through how to think about certain things. And so, these were some of the things that we talked about, right? So the first one was, where do people work, and how important is kind of face-to-face collaboration versus people being able to work somewhat independently, or be able to be more flexible. And so this was a big part of the conversation because I said, look, I know there's a lot of companies who did relatively well through the pandemic, but they're very collaboration-centric companies. Maybe they're creative. The output of what they do is dependent on a lot of creativity or a lot of human interaction, and they're they're very eager to get back to working together, right? But for the companies that were able to make remote work and be successful with it, and it doesn't significantly disrupt what they do, this is going to be a big change, right? This is something that I think you'll see a lot of companies begin to, not just tech companies, right? Because we talked about, hey, Amazon and Azure and Google and other people were allowing people to work outside of, Silicon Valley and Seattle and stuff like that. But I think this is going to have sort of a second order effect on other companies who are going to say, look, we want to be able to go hire the best talent we possibly can. And if before we sort of only focused on if you could come to the office or if you live somewhere and we found that you could be successful, that's going to have some interesting sort of second order effects, right? Like, will they start opening up their hiring? Will they, kind of try and create sort of secondary order, sort of centers of excellence or, pockets of where people could kind of roughly gather together. And that may become something that becomes the new normal for the company. So that's sort of an interesting thing to take a look at. The other thing that'll come out of that is you're going to have a lot of companies who are looking at, how much are they willing to pay for rental space, essentially where you sit if you had an office. You may see them relocating headquarters, or regional offices and so forth. So that may shift the power dynamics of your company. And I say that in the context of, it's one thing to have headquarters and like remote offices. It's another thing to have an office that has a senior enough person that you're considered an important site. And I say this from having worked at certain companies in which where I worked was considered sort of headquarters or secondary headquarters versus, some remote sort of office. And the dynamics of what's considered possible out of certain places, it matters. And, you may say, well, it shouldn't matter. Everybody's on the end of a computer and everybody's equal over the internet. That matters. So the locality will have an impact on companies, and it may shift back to it. But I think we're also going to see, companies, looking at their rent bill and depending on the flexibility of what their rent bill was or their ownership of things, we're seeing and hearing a lot of things about companies not keeping everything, not keeping everything they had before, reducing those costs, reducing travel costs. CFOs are looking at that and going, boy, my T&E, my travel and expense budget was way down the last couple of years. That's really a nice way to drive profitability or to drive reinvestment in other areas. So the locality will have a lot of impact on that. I think we're seeing whether or not companies are willing to invest in remote-friendly technologies. And I don't mean just things like VPN or Slack or other things, but like, how much are they willing to invest? And if they're willing to do that, are they also willing to invest in your skill set for moving them into new places? So I think I've told this story on the show before. Example, my neighbor just happens to work in technology. He happens to be very data center centric. His skill set was very data center centric. And he just happened to begin taking some AWS certification courses. That was just something that was sort of part of, a refresh and something he wanted to do. But it really came into play because all of a sudden, once they were remote, they were out of their offices, they started setting up remote-friendly technologies out of AWS. And, so I think his is an example, and it's just probably one of hundreds and thousands of people who, were kind of forced to begin to use the cloud, whether it was a infrastructure cloud or a SaaS cloud or something. And I suspect we will begin to see sort of a boom of, people trying to gain, cloud skills, cloud certifications maybe that weren't necessarily looking at that in the past, or companies will recognize its importance and emphasize that. So, those are just a couple of simple things. The next one becomes sort of interesting is, right now, and probably for the last 18 or so months, the groups that have been working on these new things to keep the business running in this new way, or, find a new way to, deliver your goods, or, have remote, kiosks and things, whatever it might be, develop a new application. I think we're going to start to see some interesting things come out of that because if we if leadership starts to take a view that we need to be more prepared for change on a more frequent basis, and maybe we will because of potential pandemics or because of, political instability or because of whatever it might be, global warming, these big sort of macro level things, we may see some very interesting prioritization of how much do we really care, or do we fund the things that we used to sort of call, the stable things that ran our business versus, investing in the flexibility, because flexibility becomes the new normal. It doesn't become the, what do you do in a pandemic? And I think that's really going to be the thing to look at in your company as to whether or not, if the things that you did will remain, the way they are, right? They've become the new habits, they become the new visibility. But again, I think a lot of what comes out of these things is, we've now been through all this change and we're still processing it. We still don't totally understand it and, how we're going to adapt to it and all this sort of stuff. But, at some point you sort of forget that there was something before, right? You forget that you used to do things a different way. And, I think that's the other thing to really look at if I boil it down, beyond the people side of things, is the technology, the recognition, the prioritization, where you put budgeting, may very well begin to go towards more and more of these application building efforts, these, leverage the flexibility of the cloud techniques, because, companies start to adopt this idea that more frequent change is going to become the new normal, not, these sort of, 100-year flood types of things like we've seen with the pandemic or something else. Now, I've talked a lot for the last 15 minutes or so about, what some of the changes might be, and I've kind of tried to bundle them into, big things, people and process, and maybe some technology priorities and stuff. The other side of this is going to be interesting is right now we're all looking at this in the near term, right? So what have we seen over the last 18 months? We sort of always project, well, whatever we've seen in the near term probably happens again, right? It's our sort of near term bias. But what'll be interesting is, a couple of years from now, we're sort of going to go through the thing that, came out of the A16Z paper, which was like, hey, you'll get started in the cloud and you'll do it for a while. And then at some point it'll become steady state and you'll look at the cost of it and you'll want to remediate it. And, I think this same sort of thing is going to happen as a part of sort of post-COVID, whenever post-COVID happens to happen. Maybe it's 22 or 23, who knows? I don't know that I can handle it if it's 23, but hopefully it's 22. But I think we're going to see a lot of companies, get some cloud bills because we just said, hey, go do whatever you have to do. COVID was a very, very expensive thing in a lot of ways for a lot of companies. And I think we're going to go through some interesting psychology and math and spreadsheets and all sorts of things of like, hey, do we remediate these applications that we put in the cloud? Like, is that, that's technical debt. We're not going to spend any time on that. I think that's going to be the biggest kind of post-COVID thing that will come out of this is, we did a whole lot of things in a really short period of time. Was that a good idea? Do we want to unwind them? And I think what it's going to do is it's going to create sort of, for those of you that have been around for probably more than 5 or 8 or 10 years in this industry, you'll remember when Gartner, the analyst firm, came up with this idea of what was called a bimodal IT, right? Which was you have the fast IT and then you have sort of the slow IT that maintains the old systems, and you have the fast one that works on new cool things. And they sort of were encouraging that because in their mind they couldn't wrap their head around how the old folks and the new folks, or the old applications and the new applications could work together. I think we very well, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, see sort of a bimodal 2.0 come out of post-COVID. And people should kind of watch out for that because it can create some very interesting, dynamics and so forth. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap it up. I didn't get into sort of all the conversation. It turned out to be a big conversation, but I did want to hit on 3 or 4 of the big topics that I thought were sort of interesting. I'd be curious if people have been thinking about this at all, or whether or not they're, sort of just accepting that, this is now the new normal and this is how things will be going forward and so forth. So anyways, your feedback's always welcome. We've been seeing the show uptick again. I don't know if that's just people coming back from the summer or new listeners. If you're telling a friend and helping us grow the show, that is awesome. We've been up another, 8 or 10% here recently. So whoever is listening more than you were before, whether it's somebody new or you came back to the show or you've told a friend, thank you. We're always grateful that the show grows and that it spreads out. I think we're in 125 countries, which is just insane. That there's people in all sorts of places listening to the show. That's pretty awesome. I did randomly. I had somebody. I'll tell this little story. I thought it was sort of funny. I was doing a webinar at work, or I was doing a presentation or something at work, and I had somebody hit me up after the show or after the presentation, and they said, I got about halfway through doing it, and I was listening in, and so on and so forth, and it dawned on me. They said, "Boy, I've heard this voice before. Where in the world have I heard this voice before?" And then they figured out that I was presenting, and they put two and two together, and they said, I don't ever really remember what your name was that was on the show. I just knew your voice. So that's always fun when somebody recognizes you. It's podcasting is a very interesting, intimate sort of medium. We're in your heads, and so we appreciate the feedback anytime you get a chance, whether it's good or bad. If you like the show, if we're providing anything useful for you, we really appreciate it. Any feedback you can give us, show at thecloudcast.net. Tell us what you want to hear about. Tell us feedback. Tell us what topics to focus on. Anything to make the show better or more useful for you, we're always happy to try and do. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the community. Thanks for giving us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts and all the other ways that you get your podcasts. And I will wrap it up, and I will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.